He goes on to critique, through a reading of Freud and Weber, of charisma and the way that secular charisma comes in and plays an important role in binding polities and so on, right? And the classic figure of the charismatic leader. You're Hitler's, if you wish. That's not a prompt to say that we should read Mein Kampf in this reading club, as someone has suggested. We
You
will
were
not be doing
suggesting that
that.
Hitler had Riz, though. This is what you were saying,
Right,
right? He's a
exactly. Yeah,
charismatic leader,
yeah.
which that's not a podcast position. That's an individual position.
Anyway, so on charisma, let me just quote from this because I think it's great. The sheer revelation of someone's inner impulses became exciting. If a person could reveal himself in public and yet control the process of self disclosure, he was exciting. You felt he was powerful, but couldn't explain why. This is secular charisma, a psychic striptease. Like, that's great.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustavia, on fait le bunga, bunga. Stockholm ou Monaco, ou Montevideo, Oslo, Tokyo, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, Inner Circle of BungaCast subscribers, to the BungaCast Reading Club. This is the third edition of the 2024-25 syllabus, where we're discussing in this block place, the future of place. Is politics possible without a sense of place? So this is the third session. The fourth session we'll conclude with a live session, and we'll be announcing the details of that in the show notes here, yeah, I think so. Yeah, and then in future on Patreon as well, so that you can plan around that and join us live to talk about David Harvey's Condition of Postmodernity, specifically the section on the experience of space and time, and indeed to reflect on the series as a whole, and everything that we've learned through readings of Zimmel, Berman, Auger, Sennett, and indeed David Harvey. Just to recap what the series is about, place seems increasingly redundant, overcome by globalization, digitalization, cosmopolitanism, postmodernity. Cities are increasingly composed of identityless and historyless non-places. We surely require spaces where people can gather, public squares or third places like bars and cafes. But does place necessarily imply rootedness or authenticity? What is the role of place in the generation of sociability and indeed political action? So today we're discussing a section from Richard Sennett's The Fall of Public Man on the Psychology of Capitalism, which is a book from 1972. It's a great book, I think, a real sort of classic of post-war sociology, and maybe one of the best books written in social criticism, or in the kind of top five books of social criticism from the kind of 60s, 70s period on. That's at least my sense of the book. And I will make reference to things it's similar to. So, Richard Sennett, if you're not familiar, I mean, he's still alive. He was born immediately after the Second World War, and is a sociologist at the LSE, formerly at NYU. His work has dealt with fairly classic themes of the city, the family, work, and personhood. But the urban question is probably foremost in his work across all that he's done. He was associated with the New Left, and is a baby boomer himself. Together with Christopher Lasch, I think he's probably one whose greatness as a social critic, or whose great works as a social critic, let's say, has been founded on being a clear-eyed critic of the New Left, and doing so early on. This book is in 1972, and it reflects quite clearly on the period known as the 1960s, not just the decade, but the whole social transformation, cultural revolution that happened then, and was quite critical of themes that expressed, and how that actually kind of captured something that was going on in modernity as a whole. So as we'll find out here, he critiques the criticism of alienation. And if to maybe put it a little bit more simply, he's critical of the New Left pursuit of authenticity, intimacy, connection, in effect, all the psychologization of politics, or the putting in place of psychology in lieu of politics that the new left kind of ushered in, or the cultural revolution of the 1960s ushered in. And he not only in doing so in this book here actually reflects on modernity as a whole, and kind of goes, maybe this kind of narcissistic tendency, what he calls the fall of public man, is something that's gone on throughout capitalist modernity, or at least since the 1800s, which is a more thoroughgoing critique, I think, in some ways, than Christopher Lash's critique of narcissism, where the good times were the good times were still in the 1890s, whereas for Sennett the good times are in the 1750s. Maybe I'm being a bit vulgar in putting it that way. We can get to that. Guys, do you have a general appraisal of the book, a sense of it? I mean, just briefly.
I mean, I'm familiar with the cover um, of the book,
Which you should always use as a basis to judge the rest on.
which I obviously judge it for, and it has, I guess it does have a place in the kind of in the books you should have read as an undergraduate kind of list. But no, I mean, I haven't read it cover to cover, so I should probably be a bit circumspect about what I say.
Phil?
Yeah, so rereading it for the club, and like George, I mean, I kind of, my encounter was it at the undergraduate level, and so it's interesting revisiting it now, and having more context and background, I suppose, for it. It doesn't strike me, I suppose, as much as it did before. Like you say, I very much think of I mean, I didn't at the time. I think of Sennett now very much as part of that kind of New York new left. Though I don't think I don't think he's quite. I mean, his themes are very similar to people like Daniel Bell and Christopher Lash, like you say. Though I don't think he's ever quite distanced himself from the left in the way that Christopher Lash did. The main thing, I guess, that strikes me looking at it now is it just feels so familiar. And I don't just mean because it's being revisited. I mean the themes, the discussions, the points. It feels like we're still kind of stirring the same pot in a way, and that there's nothing new since across the entirety of the post-war era. I mean, there's kind of political events and the rise and fall of particular eras, but even the eras repeat themselves. So, if we can think of the post-Cold War era, say until from the end of history till the end of history, 25 years or so, you can take that as something like a protracted reiteration of the 1960s.
Yeah.
And now, in the end of history, we're in some kind of crappy remake of the 1970s. And both of these have occurred at kind of lower levels of economic growth, and generally kind of, in many ways, more degraded social conditions, perhaps. And certainly with more degraded politics, I think. And so it's, I suppose the word I'm looking for is, it was kind of disheartening to see that we're very much, like I say, kind of still stirring the pot in terms of these themes of urbanism, community, the failure of modernity, the decline of the public, alienation. It's all, I don't know. So that was the most, the thing that impressed itself the most upon me.
Yeah, and indeed. I mean, it's to no fault of Sennett's, but these are also
No,
points that we
no,
made in
indeed.
discussing Christopher Lash. We're like, wait, this is discuss particularly the culture of narcissism when we did that a while ago, years ago. It was like, well, this is just so about now. This is so about online
It's
politics,
so about
about
me.
it's so about me. Yeah, exactly. As I agree with Phil. It's a bit disheartening. You're like, well, I mean, on the one hand, you're struck by the perspicaciousness of the work, and on the other hand, disappointed with your times and going, fuck, man, we're still in the same problems that they were dealing with in 1975 or whatever.
Yeah, I suppose. Sorry, go on, George.
No, I was just going to say, but perhaps with an additional note of sadness, almost. I mean, to go back to the cover, which I probably should have explained for listeners. I'm aware podcast isn't necessarily the best medium through which to describe the
Show
cover.
us the book. You've got a video.
I don't have a copy of it. I read an electronic copy, but it's the Death of Marat. So that painting, which is Google it if you don't know it, listeners. And this is like, there's a public man who's had a rather abrupt and sudden fall in his bath, aided by the dagger of a counter-revolutionary. I guess what the point I'm trying to make is that the public men had further to fall in the past. So if we today have fallen, it seems like we haven't fallen even from as far as the Jacobins might have been able to.
I suppose it makes me think, like, reading, so recently I was kind of revisiting Lash's thing about the retreat of the elite, and how this, he makes the point,
Revolt
even,
of the elite. Yeah.
sorry, revolt of the elite, yeah. And he makes the point that, he was very early on to the gated communities, and he took the kind of this kind of self-segregation and the incipient privatization as the withdrawal from the public, as this revolt, but kind of recoil of the elite from engagement with mass democracy, being held to public accountability, to public standards, to public services, and so on. And that's very much of the times, right? And I guess it's similar with the fall of public man. These things that Sennett kind of identified within the first 2 decades of the post-war era, or in the aftermath of the Second World War. Um, how long does that kind of decline run?
Well, so
Like with Lash, how long does it run? How long does it run, and does it ever actually bottom out, or is it just this kind of staggered, spiral of slow collapse and decline?
well, and these, it suggests a sort of declension narrative, and that itself then suggests a sort of
What? Sorry,
declension narrative.
is that the right way to
Is that a word?
declension?
I'm not
Yeah,
even gonna.
Declinism, you mean?
because declension might mean like you declension of
No, no.
verbs
A
and
declensionary is a story that portrays a decline or worsening over time, and so
ar-
the
archaic. It's an archaic usage.
I, I
I've just
I don't
googled
know.
it.
No, it's used pretty frequently. If you talk about Oswald Spengler, you'll talk about declension narratives.
I think a
Um,
narrative of declension would be the correct term, actually.
is it?
But I think it's also fine just to
Why?
say declinist.
Okay.
I
Well,
think
We're talking about declines here.
yes.
Okay. Just to clarify, I thought we were supposed to come in with comments and questions and helpful
Helpful. Yeah, that's the one to ponder.
topics.
Anyway, when was it good? That's what it suggests. Or the question that it prompts. When was it? When was man the right degree of public? When was he not a narcissist? When did he not escape into privatism? And I,
And sorry to interrupt, but also
yeah,
bearing in mind, this kind of comes in the aftermath of the Second World War. And so, who would be the kind of the figures of the public figures? Kind of you'd have the fascist or kind of Stalinist archetypes of public figures, these kind of men who are so public that they're kind of overwhelmingly so. And then you might have, major public figures of the Western world, such as Churchill or maybe Eisenhower or Roosevelt and so on. So, even that, right? If you're talking about public figures in that context, you're talking about an extraordinary context of public life, which
but
is a
but
world
even
war.
those,
Yeah.
even those would be aspects of charismatic authority, right? And he's critical of this. So
Yes,
let me
yeah,
let me
you're
just.
right.
So simply being in public is not what Sennett's notion of public man is, right? Sennett's notion of public man, will come on to this, and is more is the world of the Enlightenment or the 1750s than it is of the 1940s or even of the
No, no,
1840s.
indeed.
So
But
so
I
let me
mean,
just quote something, because I
sorry,
think
it's only
yeah.
to say, like that the kind of the most immediate frame of reference, or the close kind of proximity, would also of what public life would be like in the middle of the century, would also be, like you say, a kind of a distortion or a kind of monstrous mutation of the classical ideal. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to throw in another, this hopefully more helpful aside. This what you were saying there, Alex, made me think of the song "No More Heroes," because there is like, this is kind of a declensionist song. if you will. It's saying there's no more, what happened to all the Shakespeareos? What happened to Leon Trotsky? Got an ice pick, made his ears burn. There's, there is and that's a bit later, 77. So there is like, I don't know, there is always a kind of yearning for like the, because I would imagine a hero could be considered as the kind of the apotheosis of the public man, the kind of, who's somebody who's moving history forward, and already by the 70s there was a feeling of that these sorts of men and women don't really exist anymore.
Hello friends, you've reached the end of a sample from an episode only available to subscribers. We put out 2 episodes a month for free. For access to the rest in its entirety, please join us at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers receive original, exclusive episodes with the entirety of the BungaCast cast. That's George Hoare, myself Alex Hochuli, and our contributing editors, Philip Cunliffe, Amber Lee Frost, Catherine Liu, Lee Jones, Alex Gurevich, and Lee Phillips. We've got extended interviews with guests, episodes on current affairs, and original episodes on theory, history, and culture, so as to understand the crises of our times. We also have the BungaCast Reading Club, where Phil, George, and myself present the key books and essays necessary for understanding the world today, how we got here, and where we might be going. Subscribers also get a digital subscription to Damage Magazine, with whom we're partnered, and you can find all this info at patreon.com/bungacast. We do hope you'll join us. These are turbulent times, and ideologically confused ones as well. What we try to do is find political clarity, to move beyond the decadent age of Bunga Bunga.